Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 277, and we're going to talk about assimilation. I was really late today. I had to take care of a couple of things, and I wasn't going to do an episode, but then I saw posts about assimilation. Particularly, I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I just saw the headline of how Clinton Russell was talking about assimilation. And to be fair, and I don't actually know what he said, but the term itself is something I have a problem with. And I was going to have an episode just about sloppy use of terms, part two, and assimilation was going to be part of that. But assimilation is a not a very nice term, and I'm guessing that the way that people like Clinton Russell, I didn't listen to it, I planned to, but just ran out of time. But I just wanted to put it out there that assimilation, the term itself, is really a bad term given its history, where it came from, and what it implied, and what it required of people. And so the subtitle of this episode is Bad Racism Resurrected. And so, of all the episodes I've done so far, this is probably the most off the cuff, off the top of my head kind of episode. So it's an old idea. Assimilation is an old idea. Um, Probably most recently in the 1960s, but it's an idea that came from the early 1900s. And even after the American Revolution, there were two general broad trains of thought in America on how people were expected to live in America. One was the approach of homogeneity. We all have to be kind of the same. And that is where assimilation comes in. So if we're all going to be kind of homogenous, we're going to be a homogenous, we're all very similar to each other population, then we got to talk about assimilation, right? Because even then, people were coming from all over the place, all over Europe. And so many different languages were being spoken, not just English. You got German, you got um, Dutch, you got French, you got all these different Spanish, you got all these different languages being spoken. And so, what do we do? Do we stay multicultural? Do we remain diverse? And so the two trains of thought was, okay, we all got to become homogenous. We all have to be similar to each other, hence assimilation. And then the other competing uh, approach was, let's maintain diversity. Let's have a pluralistic society where all these people are going to be doing things differently. And so it begs the question, or it leads us to ask the question, what is it to be an American, really? And if we talk about homogeneity, right, where everyone has to be the same, okay, by whose standards? And what goes into this homogenous type standard? Like, what do you have to do? What do I have to sacrifice? What do I have to change in order to be like everybody else? Like, how far does that go? And then if we talk about diversity, oh, okay, well then if we have diversity, is there anything that will hold us together, anything that we share in common, or nothing at all? And I think this is the push and pull that you see through history is if everyone has to be the same, how similar? If we maintain diversity, well, how different, right? And so this going back and forth. Also, I have a big problem with the word assimilation, primarily because the way that it was originally used, only whites could be assimilated, right? So blacks, former slaves, whatever, don't even think about it. And Native Americans, indigenous people, Asians, don't even think about it, right? And so Asians weren't even given citizenship in the United States until much, much later. I forget exactly when it was, but clearly in the early 1900s, Asians weren't allowed to be citizens, okay? And so when you talk about assimilation, it is directly targeting only whites, people who would be considered whites. And so you had this concept of anglo-conformity, where everyone had to conform to this sort of Northwest European standard of behavior. And because you had such a strong impulse to have everyone conform to this mythological non-existent, but people imagine Anglo society, so anglo-conformity, that you had this strong impulse of nativism, right? Where everyone has to be an American. And if you're not an American, somehow you're a second-class citizen. And so, in order to foster and bring about this assimilationist process in the early 1900s, businesses had, like especially large factories that employed lots of immigrants, they had the office of the Americanizer. And there was just this person who worked for the company who would visit the workers' homes and teach them how they're supposed to act, the kinds of foods they're supposed to eat, the kinds of clothes they're supposed to wear, to get rid of all vestiges and signs and evidence that they are an immigrant and just conform and become like everybody else, right? And so, which sounds kind of crazy, right? And almost to the point where, nah, they didn't do that, did they? But it's in the books. I did that research for my dissertation when I was getting my PhD. Um, I don't know how long ago was that? Like about 20 years ago, right? And so all of this was pretty much common knowledge, and in the books, they wrote it like it was pretty casual. But again, it's conformity to what ideal? Was it real? Was it imagined? And what about all those other people who weren't allowed to, or the idea that they would be assimilated, right? So in the case of blacks, right, they said, I'll give it about 500 years and maybe we can start talking about assimilation, okay? And so assimilation was confined and restricted and only open to people who were considered white, right? And yeah, I know you can get into, mulattoes, right? People who were children of interracial relationships, right? And so how some of them could be passed as white people. Okay, yeah, whatever. I'm just talking about the broad strokes of the term assimilation, where it came from and how it was used. And so a lot of people kept pushing this idea of assimilation. And so people had to become white. And if you were white, okay, fine. But everyone else, well, you were clearly different, so forget about it, right? And you had all of these immigration restriction acts, particularly the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, which basically reduced immigration allowances according to how many people were already citizens in the United States prior to the passing of the act. So in 1924, since Asians weren't allowed to be citizens, then the percentage is zero, right? So the quota is based on how many people from your region that are already citizens, but no one from Asia was allowed to be a citizen, so the number is zero, right? The number of people who are allowed to come in from Asia after 1924 is zero. But of course, you're beginning to have international relationships with these people. And so you need to be able to give visas for diplomats, right, for the embassies and all those other kind of stuff. And so 30 was the number of visas that were given to Asian countries, which allowed for ambassadors to go back and forth, et cetera, right? And so, that's what assimilation, this idea led to, restrictions, quotas, and then once you pass the act in 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act, which was an immigration quota act, right? Once you pass that, then you're like, okay, so everyone who already got in the country, we got to turn them into Americans. And that's where you saw the Americanizers and all this other kind of stuff, right? And also, when you look at movies from back in the day, they were making fun of, Italians, right? They call them garlic eaters, right? I was watching Wonderful Life a couple weeks ago, and the big banker, right, who was trying to put the savings and loan out of business. I don't know if you saw the movie, right? He refers to the clientele of the small bank, the savings and loan, as being a bunch of immigrants, garlic eaters, right? So he's talking about Italian people, right? And how they're not white, how they're somehow lower than everybody else. So you have all of this stuff, which makes it possible then to belittle other cultures, all their smells, the business practices, the cultural practices, all this other kind of stuff. And so the rejection of ethnic churches also then falls into line there. You're not allowed to speak that language that you spoke over there, you're speaking American now, right? And so even today, you go into downtown Philly, you have some business establishments there that also once in a while they make the news because they get frustrated with all the immigrants. And so they have a sign out in front that order an American. Like American is a language, right? It's English, buddy. So it's sort of like, you know, you have all these, once you get this attitude going, then you get this low IQ response by a lot of people. Like you kind of know what they're saying, what their intent is, what they're trying to say for right or wrong, but it comes out weird, and it actually just causes more problems than others. I mean, you can imagine the conversation, right? So someone going up to the person who clearly is someone not born in America, and they say, "Order an American." What are you talking about? Are you talking about English? You mean English? How about if you learn some English? And then you have this escalation of tension and problem, and it's just a bad thing. Nah, so I get frustrated every time I hear people use the word assimilation because it did represent normalized racism back in the day, legalized discrimination based on bad criteria. So people like Vivek and Elon Musk want to talk about meritocracy. Well, meritocracy and assimilation don't go together. They just don't, right? And so what are we really talking about that people are going to use and dig up this old bad term, assimilation, and try to use it and somehow clean it up and pass it off like it's an okay term to use today, right? Uh, let's not talk about assimilation, okay? Maybe we can talk about acculturation, right? But the problem with that is how do we, so we're not going to look at, appearances or the language or your accent. We're just going to talk about culture. So as long as you adapt to the American culture, which version of America are you talking about? Are we talking about the leftists, right? The woke people? That's what's on the news. That's what's all on TV and all the movies is be woke. So you want people to acculturate, that is, adopt the cultural practices of the woke culture. It's extremely problematic, right? And so I guess it's not an easy position to advocate, but it always comes back to freedom, right? And so the standard that people should be held to is follow the law. And yes, I have a problem with all the law and the regulations. So on the one hand, we say you got to abide by the law, right? But the law of like maybe don't shoplift, the law of you got to get a job. And so at the same time we say abide by the law, at the same time what's happening is you're rolling back all of these welfare programs. You're getting rid of all of the injustices in society that are created by a lot of bad laws. And so the laws that people need to abide by would only require them to support themselves, right? Because the government is not going to give them any money. There's no such thing as public housing. There's no welfare. There's no, what is it? Stimmy checks or anything like this, right? You want to be able to live in this country. You got to find a job. You got to pay your bills. Otherwise, you're going to starve to death. That's it, right? And if someone is going to be generous and welcome you into their home or give you shelter, you still got to pay for it, right? And so you got to get off your butt, find a job, and so you can pay for your food and your rent. So if we just do that, like have people honor the law, respect the law, I think that would do a lot, right? And no one would really care, right? Beyond that, right? Hey, I hired you to do this job. Did you do the job? Yes, I did the job. Okay, well then there it is. Here's your check. Go on your way. Are you going to respect the freedom and the rights of others? Which apparently, if you look at a lot of the immigrants that are coming to this country illegally, of course they don't respect the freedom of the others. They expect these handouts. They expect better food. They expect better lodging. That is imposing and oppressing everybody else who used to own those properties, who used to have that money, but then had to give it up because of taxes. People should have the freedom of religion as long as it is within the bounds of the law. And so if your religion is, for example, murdering your spouse, right? Okay, well, you can't do that. You can't practice that any longer because you're in a different country. And that has to be made clear as well. Practice of culture. Sure, you can practice your culture, right? But at the same time, you cannot force other people to respect your culture, right? You're coming in as a foreigner into this country, and you knew that there was a price that you need to pay in order to do that. In other words, if you come from your society which had this single culture, this is the way everyone did it, but then you come to this country, and no one does that, okay? Well, then you have to figure out how to adapt, right? You have to adapt. So, give you an example. Um, in Muslim countries, they would pray 5 times a day, right? And whatever you're doing, you got to drop it and you got to pray 5 times a day. Also, in Muslim countries, you have Ramadan, which is a month long of fasting. All right. You're not allowed to eat during the day. So you can eat kind of at night, I guess some people will say, right? You can eat at night, but then that's it. You can't eat during the day. And I've met and I've known and taught many Muslims, and it was a really interesting thing where you saw them having to negotiate their personal culture and religion with the dominant culture here in the United States. And so a lot of them would start not holding to Ramadan, right? They would eat during the day because they wouldn't be able to study. Like I knew this one guy, really smart guy, but then he went to law school, and then Ramadan came along. It was very difficult for him to maintain his studies, his work, his study rhythm and fast, right? He was always hungry, and it disrupted his studying, and so he had to make a compromise and just sort of start eating, at least while he was in law school. I don't know what he did after law school, right? And then praying. If you work at a business that will allow you to excuse yourself, right? So instead of having a smoke break, you have a prayer break, okay? If your business would allow you to do that and give you the space to do that, okay, fine. But no one is obligated to provide that for you, right? Like just say you are driving a bus, right? A public bus, and then time to pray. You can't stop the bus and make all your passengers wait for you to get done praying. You understand what I mean? And so, and the reason why I say this is because personally, my personal choice is I don't work on Sunday, right? Given it's the Sabbath, I don't work, right? But the number of jobs that I can apply to is severely cut down. I mean, retail, no way I can get a job working retail unless it's like Chick-fil-A or a place like that that closes on Sunday. But I have to realize that right there is where the rubber meets the road. Do I continue to maintain this religious practice, or do I say, forget it, I can't keep religion in the way that I want to, and now I have to be able to work on Sunday? Everyone has to be faced with that choice, right? You can't say to your business, hey, look, I don't work on Sundays, so, right? Sometimes they'll let you do that, but if they say, oh, sorry, then I can't hire you, then that's the way it goes. And so that's what I'm trying to say. What probably people like Clinton Russell, what they want is people to respect the law of this country, the way we do things in this country. And the real problem is government. Government has given us the situation where now we have to try to resurrect these old racist terms and try to adapt them and use them in a different way to explain what we want of these immigrants when they come to this country, right? So it's government that has created these immigration problems, that has opened the door for all these people who expect to be given money, given a place to stay without having to work, right? These are the people who get to maintain their old ways. It's because of welfare, right? There is no cost any longer. There is no choice that needs to be made. They all gravitate to the same community. And so then, since no one has to find a job, right, then they can maintain all of their old practices. And they even get the impression that, no, 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 they don't have to abide by the laws of America, right? They can just continue and pass laws in their own community, which are just like where they came from, right? And that has to stop, right? And so, in other words, it's government and their corruption and their opening of the borders, which has created all of these problems. And even these weird conversations about the H-1 visa, it's a regulation, okay? So if you didn't have all of those regulations that dictated how businesses were going to do work and all this other kind of stuff, and then you wouldn't even have this work visa phenomena, right? Right? People would just simply go and do what they wanted to do, and no one would care. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. A little venting too. I don't mean to sound like I'm angry. I just get really excited because I had to live through that crap, right? I had to live through this whole you got to be an American if you want to live here crap. What are you talking about? I work harder than you. Everyone in my community, they work harder than you. What do you mean they don't deserve to live here, right? They provide you the services that make your life better. So, what do you mean they have to do more somehow, right? And a lot of the guys that I knew, a lot of the people I knew, they came long after they could learn English, right? Learning English was never going to happen with these people, right? They were just too old. And, that window of being able to learn language, and, even if they did try to speak English, what happens? People make fun of them for their, the language skills, right? But no one complained though about the services that they provided. No one complained about all the work they did, right? And so why are you going to impose more standards on top of that because of some, arrogant opinion of superiority, which is what happens in assimilation? My culture is better than your culture. No, let everyone figure it out. One of the things that bothered a lot of people when I was younger was when I asked them to take their shoes off when they came into my house. Right, right, because we don't wear shoes. That's disgusting, man. You like walked on bird crap, duck crap, and now you're going to like bring all that stuff in my house? No, you take your shoes off before you come in, right? And when I was younger, people would give me such a hard time for that. They're like, "Oh, we got to take our shoes off." But nowadays, I see more and more people, take their shoes off because thinking about it, yeah, it's pretty gross. It's pretty disgusting. And so more and more people are taking, and so what you should have is a competition of ideas, right? The more free the society is, the better practices. And yes, I think that taking your shoes off when you go inside your house is a better practice, right? And if you don't do it, so what? I don't care, right? You're taking your shoes off when you come into my house, though, right? And so that's the thing. And so people get to decide what they want to maintain and what they want to discard. And this happens across the board, whether it's religion, culture, marriage, divorce, child rearing, education, schooling, you name it. Everything should take place based on the rules of freedom and let everyone decide how they want to live. And in that way, you get a kind of acceptable level of homogeneous diversity, right? So everyone gets to be diverse and live in America the way they want, but they always respect freedom, the principles of freedom, and the basic rules of the land. And that's it, right? And so I wish we would just stop it with this assimilation. And that's the only reason why I did this episode to bash on assimilation. So I'll talk to you guys next time.